You know, one of the ways that some teachers talk about the practice of meditation, as you get further along and you understand the teachings, is that when you sit down to practice, you should sit down and die. You should sit down and die. What does that mean? It means as you're sitting there, you're letting go of your identification with the physical body. As you're sitting there, you're letting go of your identification with the thought process. So by doing that, that's a death of the personality, isn't it? Yeah, if you're no longer involved with the thought activity, and if you're no longer identifying you as this body, then what are you? Because the personality is maintained and is created out of the thought process, isn't it? Your personality, when it got instituted, when it got constituted in language, didn't it? Yeah, your life is constituted in language. Heidegger said that, the house of living is language. It creates the house you live in, right? The house of living is language. So when you move away from that, and you're practicing letting go of the identification with the physical body, you're dying. You're literally dying, because that is the only real death that exists, is the death of the personality. If you think about your death, what are you thinking about? If you think about your death, you're thinking about you as a person not being here, right? That's what you mean by dying. Me as a person, I won't be here. This body won't be here, and I identify myself with this body. And without this body being here, the thinking can't continue. And if the thinking can't continue, then I can't have a personality. So it's over. That's the death. Well, the good news is, and that's why these practices work, is that what dies when that dies is nothing. Because the personality never was what you actually were. It's something that you took on board when you got language. So it doesn't have an actual life. It's not actually real. But you identify yourself so thoroughly with it that if it dies, you think you'll die. You identify yourself so thoroughly with the body that if it dies, you think you'll die. And of course you do, because you were born into a tribe in which this tribe believes that stuff. Everybody believes that stuff. It's something that is so considered to be true that it's not a question, right? It's so considered to be true. If you look at your own conditioning, if you look at your own developmental existence as you grew up from being a child, right? You left the idea of who you were a long time ago. That was very, very early on that got put into place. And at that point, you were dependent on these people to keep you alive. At that point, you were depending on these people to keep you alive. You were so uninformed about the reality that people live in that you'd be afraid to leave the house. You wouldn't know where to go. You wouldn't know how to get back, right? That's the condition we're in at the time that we're given the main load, the main load of what reality is, right? So that's way behind us. So that gets left behind. And by the time you go to school, you're not interested in who am I. That's completely irrelevant. That's been answered, right? You're not interested in whether this is me, am I this physical body? That's completely irrelevant. That's been answered. Now you go to school. Now as that body and as that personality, you're going to start playing the game, which is competitive, isn't it? Yeah, as soon as you go to school, the first day of school, you look around, oh shit, now what? Right? You look around, you see there are people in that room that appear to you to be prettier than you, handsomer than you, have nicer clothes than you, smarter than you, all of it. All shows up at once, right? It's like, oh, now what, So what I did, I peed my pants, in kindergarten, during the flag salute. I figured I'm getting out of here. So if I pee my pants, they'll have to let me go home, right? And they did. They called my mother and she took me home. The only thing was I had to come back the next day. So the pants peeing thing didn't work, right? I had to come up with other strategies. And I did. And you will, right? I came up with other strategies. My primary strategy as a little child and a teenager was to be invisible. Teachers loved me. They loved me. You know, they would say, "Bill, why don't you be like him? He never says anything. He's not a problem. Why don't you shut up and be like him?" Right? So I was getting rewarded for being invisible, right? And I was good at it. You know, I could be in line. I could go to McDonald's, right, and be in line, and people would walk in front of me, and I would say, they didn't even see me. That's how good I was at being invisible, right? Well, you know, there's a cost to being invisible in life, right? Because if you're invisible, everybody relates to you as if you don't matter, as if you're not even there, right? Well, I was used to that. That was the way my parents related to me, right? You see how it goes, right? And then this whole thing starts getting cobbled together, you know, personality, you know. So what are you going to do? How are you going to figure out how to be in this world? You got to have something. You got to have something to offer. You got to have something that makes you better, something that makes you different, something that makes you unique, right? And so if you look back in your childhood, that was the game you were playing. So how did you do it? Look back and check it out in your own childhood. How did you do it? Did you become the class clown? Did you become the troublemaker? Did you become the invisible one? You know, in every class of students, they're there. They're there. In every group of human beings, they're there, right? So these are survival strategies, survival strategies. So the first thing that happens when you get involved in the social reality is that you're trying to survive. You're trying to get through this. You're trying to get through it and come out the other side of it, right? You're trying to survive the situation that you find yourself in. And then that becomes a mental process. You know, it becomes a mental process. You don't think of it as survival anymore, but it still plays there like survival, like getting through it, like not, you know, getting through it without getting hurt, without getting killed, like that. And so it gets so implanted in the way you think and the way you see things that it starts showing up like making it through the week, making it through the day, right? But you don't think about that, I'm trying to survive. No, you forgot about that it's a matter of survival, and now you're making it through the day just because it's so stressful to deal with everything coming at you all the time, right? So our life starts to become about getting through it instead of experiencing it, enjoying it. So people look forward to the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the year, the end of the 5 years, 10 years, the end of 50 years. So what people do is they project out. What have I got to look forward to? Don't worry, I'm not interested in this. What have I got to look forward to? I'm getting through this. I'm coping with this. What have I got to look forward to, right? That's how it starts to show up. And the way it starts to occur for people is, well, I can look forward to my retirement. That's the biggest mistake you could possibly make, is look forward to the end of your life. Think about it. Look forward to the end of your life. Look forward to the time that you no longer have to get up and go to work, and you no longer have to earn the money. Now you have time. For what? For what? You have time for what? That's when people realize that they were much more happy and enjoyed their life a lot more when they were working, right? Because at least I could look forward to the end of the week. That's something to look forward to, right? But now I don't even have that to look forward to. You get up in the morning and, you know, now I'm in a position where I can really choose what happens to a large extent during the day, so I'm responsible for my own misery. You know, the personality is terrified of being awake, because if the personality wakes up, it can no longer tell stories. It can no longer justify and explain why it's behaving the way it's behaving. It can no longer blame it on the circumstances. It can no longer blame it on the past. It can no longer blame it on your parents or other people. It can no longer blame it on the government. This is why the personality doesn't want to wake up, because all the self-righteousness has to go away if you wake up. Then what? Then what? You have nothing or nobody to blame for you not being happy anymore. So waking up means that you are now responsible for the condition, for the quality of your life, and for whether you're happy, whether you're peaceful, whether you're satisfied, whether you know, That's all now something that you can no longer shun the responsibility for. Well, then how do you take responsibility for that? Well, that's what this is all about. By practicing meditation, by practicing coming out of the conditioning, by practicing coming into a direct, clear recognition of the truth. Well, what's the truth? The most precious and most valuable thing you have is the experience you're having right now. If you could get with that and let go of all that crazy bullshit, you might discover a natural state of happiness. So there's a responsibility that needs to be taken for that, which means you have to be willing to let go of and give up all your self-righteous positions about everything. I was talking to somebody about this today, and they were arguing with me. Now watch. Your mind will do this with things that you hear here. They were arguing with me about the truth. And they were saying, well, yeah, but this, and yeah, well, but that, and it's not like that, and So I had to sort it out for myself in terms of whether should I just end this conversation, right? Or should I stay in the conversation, see if I can get an arrow to go through, get something to go through this maze that this person's throwing up, right? And I said, you're being self-righteous. And the person said, I'm not being self-righteous. And I said, wait a minute, slow down. Aren't you telling me you're right about what you think? Aren't you telling me that? Aren't you telling me you're right about the way you're living? Aren't you telling me it's right the way you're feeling and all that? Aren't you telling me that? Well, yeah, I guess I am. Well, isn't that the source of your suffering? Oh. So you see, you have to slow down and start to pay attention, start to look at how you're actively involved in weaving a fabric of suffering in your life. You're actively involved in weaving a pattern of suffering in your life, and then you don't want any responsibility for that. It's just happening to me. I didn't ask for it to happen. It's tragic. It's traumatic. It's why I'm suffering. It's the circumstances. It's what happened to me when I was a kid. It's who my parents were. It's the rape that occurred. It's the molestation that occurred. It's the neglect that occurred when I was a kid. That created the mental state that I suffer from here. And I'm seeking relief from that. Okay, good. You're seeking relief from that. I got it, all right? Are you willing to take responsibility for yourself as the source of that relief? Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. It's inevitable. There's nothing you can do about the effect that it has to be socialized in a sick society. There's nothing you can do about that because the mother's as sick as the child.
Yeah, she is.
You see? So you can't give the mother advice, because it won't work. So that's not the answer. The answer is not to try and control what happens. Of course we will do whatever we can to minimize whatever damage is being done. Of course we will. We don't want to see our kids harmed, seriously harmed, right? We don't want to see our kids, have to experience a shooter in their school. No, we don't want that. So we do the best we can, right? Everybody's doing the best they can to try and contain the mess we're in here. But it is a mess we're in. And the mess we're in is living in our minds. It's not out here. It gets out here when we behave that way in the world, right? The world's not a sick place. The world's a beautiful place. My advice, right, is to clean up your act. My advice is for you to wake up. And I'm saying you are perfect, but who you're being is imperfect. See what I'm saying? You are perfect. The awareness that we are is perfect. What do I mean by that, right? It doesn't have a problem with anything ever. That's the perfection of it. It allows everything to be as it is, okay? Including the fact that there's a lot going on that's not workable, right? But the awareness is being with that as well. And when that is seen through the light of awareness, not through the personality, not through the judging and evaluating, right? Not through the attempts for you to improve yourself by being a better parent. Nothing wrong with that, by the way, right? But it's just limited, and there's no way you're ever going to succeed at being consistent enough about that or getting it right often enough for it to make much of a difference. That's just the way it is, right? But if you wake up to your true nature And what I mean by that is you actually do the practices and you take the time to deepen your understanding, and you really do make direct contact with the reality of what you are, and you begin living from there. Just the fact that you're living from there, you will be a model for anybody around you, because they'll recognize something with you. They'll recognize that you're grounded. They'll recognize and what kids need more than anything else is that experience that there's somebody around that feels like they're solid, feels like they're clear, feels like they're dependable, you know? Somebody around like that. So when a child is around an adult like that, they are naturally interested in wanting to please them, naturally interested in wanting to emulate them, because it's magnetic and attractive when you're being yourself, when you're being your true nature. So what that means is that in every instance, in every situation, when you're being your true nature, that you'll see the response that's possible rather than the reaction. You'll see a response that's consistent with the expression of your unconditional love, instead of the idea that you may have about how it should be and what you should do and what the kids should do and all that. And the other thing that's important to understand is that, you know, you can try and, you know, kids need structure to relax, because they don't know shit about what's going on, right? So they get anxious and scared when they don't have structure, right? And they'll make you give them structure. That's what they're doing when they act out. They're trying to get you to stop them and create structure and say to them, no, this is the structure within which we're going to work, within which you're going to behave. And the kids actually, they may put a fuss in the beginning, you know, but they really will be able to relax and enjoy themselves, because now they feel safe. It's as simple as that. And the safety that they're experiencing is a function of the fact that they can see that you're safe. They can see that you know how to be. This isn't something you're communicating. It's something that they're experiencing, like it's radiating from you, right? They have a sense that you know how to be. That's why people, when they're around awake people like the Dalai Lama, right? He's radiating something, you know? When he comes into a room he always goes over to people in the audience and shakes their hand and bows to them and so forth, and people start crying. People start crying, right? Because he's radiating an unconditional experience of love, that there's nothing he can see, no person he can see that he doesn't love. And when he speaks, he says, "You're my brothers and sisters." And he doesn't want to be considered some elevated saint. He says, I'm a simple monk. I'm a simple monk. Why? Because it's true. He's a simple monk. And he understands that his ordinary experience of his own awareness is the same as yours. So if he's a saint, you're a saint. You see, it's the same thing. That's the way it's being seen from an awake view, that there is no hierarchy of these things. You know, it's a little tricky, because in these teachings and practices, you have to have some way to say that somebody knows what they're talking about, so that they don't go around talking stupid shit to people like these people that create cults, right? You have to have some way of controlling that phenomena. And so in every system you do, you know, I mean, in Zen they have names like David Radin is an Osho. His teacher, who was a Japanese Zen master, he would determine out of his experience of you whether you knew what's true and whether you could speak that truth. And if he knew that he could see that you knew what's true and you could speak that truth, then he'd say, okay, you're an Osho. I forget what the Osho word means, but it's something that means you know what you're talking about, like that. So that's useful and important, because you don't want people, see, because if you look at the social media and if you look at the general reality out there, you got a lot of wacky people out there that are getting a lot of people following them and believing their stupid, crazy shit. That's how the world keeps being crazy, you know, because the whole world is caught up in an insane misunderstanding about reality and about what our true nature is. And that's why these teachings and these practices are still so small, you know. This is a YMCA. This is a place where wellness is supposed to be being practiced, right? But interestingly enough, the only wellness I see going on here is physical. And if you're physically well and mentally crazy, are you well?
No.
It's like I always say, if you could walk around upstairs and look at all these beautiful bodies, right? If you could hear what's going on in their minds, you would run out of the room, right? So what good is the beautiful body doing you, you know? Oh yeah, it might get you a pass in terms of getting ready acceptance by the other sex and so forth, but what are you going to do after that? Right? So well-being, if this place was really about well-being, right, there'd be an emphasis on what well-being really is. And well-being is a combination of physical, emotional, and psychological well-being, mind, matter. There is no argument about that. You know, I don't think anybody here that runs this place would argue that mind, matter is the combination that well-being comes from. But it's not practice. This is a business. We give the people what they want, not what they need, not what would make the most difference, but that's what they want. Well, how about if you train them to want what they need? That might work. How about if you had an educational component here where you have everybody that comes into the Y, right, that wants to get physically fit and wants to have well-being, wants to experience well-being? How about if you put them through a course that was mandatory before you can go to the gym to find out what you're doing? And have them learn about their mental health, not just their physical health, so that they understand, if you want well-being, fine, go to the gym, but also meditate. But also learn about your psyche, learn about your psychological existence. Find out why you're crazy. Find out why you're stressed out. Find out why you can't sleep at night. Find out why you have to fight to control your weight. See, if you're experiencing a natural state and you have a relationship with your body that's awake, you don't have to fight to control anything. You listen to what your body says, right? If you have less energy, and if you have aches and pains, right? And if you have difficulty sleeping because of the stress, and if you're eating as a way of getting satisfied, you know, and because of that you have indigestion, you know, the body communicates perfectly. The body's always giving you feedback all the time, but most of us ignore it most of the time. We just ignore it most of the time. We're paying more attention to the outside world, and we're paying more attention to whether we're comfortable or not, whether we like the way the body feels or not. And if we don't like the way the body feels, we know that we can get medication to just fix that right away. Fix that right away. And I'm not making the organization wrong, don't get me wrong. I'm not making this is part of the sickness of society in general. The organization is just reflecting that, that's all. It's just reflecting that. And that's why it's up to you. That's why I say to you that if you get this, see, if you get this academically, if you get this conceptually, right, but what you understand that you're getting, what you understand that you're hearing is setting off red flags, like saying to you, wait a minute, I'm not living like that. Wait a minute, I don't have a consistent established meditation practice. Wait a minute, I'm not spending time every day to study the teachings that allow me to have insight into the nature of my own mind. I'm not doing that. I'm not studying the nature of reality. You know, I'm not looking into the brain science to find out what the scientists have found out about the brain and how I can change my own brain. I'm not aware of the fact that neuroplasticity is real. I'm not aware of the fact that my brain is changing all the time in relationship to what's going on. That's an interesting thing to look closely at. My brain is changing all the time. It's an adaptation organism. It's an adaptation organism, right? My brain is changing all the time in relationship to what's going on. So what is going on that your brain is constantly learning from and constantly adapting to? Your craziness. That's what's going on. The brain's an organ. It doesn't know the difference. It doesn't know the difference between crazy and sane, right? So it just takes whatever data you put in there, right? If you're thinking crazy thoughts, it thinks crazy thoughts are realistic thoughts. It doesn't know, right? It just keeps doing what the brain does, right? It keeps doing what the brain does. It keeps using the conditioning to produce thoughts, and the thoughts that the brain is producing, right, has your past go into your future, because those thoughts are coming from your past conditioning. So it's producing these thoughts. And the thoughts are the interpretations and conclusions and evaluations and judgments you made in relationship to everything that's ever happened to you. Most of it was when you were a child, and you didn't know shit from shinola, and yet those judgments and evaluations that got made still play in your mind. So you still have childish thoughts. You still have infantile ways of relating to life. Look around, look at human beings. Human behavior is childish. If you look at when you get upset and you start letting the upset run your mouth, you're being a child. I want my way. You're wrong. I'm right. You have to change. Leave me alone. Don't do that, right? That's all like a little kid, right? But you see, when it's coming from an adult's mouth, right, it's not the same thing as a little kid. Little kids, we can control them, right? But when that's coming out of an adult's mouth, especially somebody that you're married to, or it's coming out of your parents to you as an adult, right? Then what happens, right? It's like an assault. It's an assault, right? I'm not taking that. You can't say that to me. That's disrespecting me. You can't say that to me. How dare you? Don't do that. This is playground stuff. This is playground stuff. If you wake up and you start to see through all that nonsense and you start to relax and you start to realize you're already home, you're already at peace, you're already happy. Why? Because you're alive. And then from that perspective, you start to look at things, and from that perspective, you can start to see craziness starts to show up as crazy. See, when you wake up, that's what happens. Craziness starts to show up as crazy. So now, because you have an awake state, of course, that has to be practiced all day long. It can't just be something that you hear about and then some light switch changes and you're awake all the time. No. You have to practice it all day long because you've been practicing being unconscious and you've been practicing identifying with your thoughts and your feelings all your life. So you have to start practicing something different all day long. And if you're paying attention, and you're paying attention from the awareness that you've discovered to be your real nature, and you're paying attention from there, and you're looking at what thoughts are happening, what feelings are happening, what the behaviors are, you can start seeing it for what it is. And if you see it for what it is, you're naturally going to lose interest in it because you're seeing it doesn't work. Yeah, the biggest illusion that you're suffering from is the illusion of who you think you are. That's the big magic trick right there, who you think you are, right? So how do you break through that? How you break through that illusion is to be awake enough to see it the way it is, to see it for what it is, to see the illusion of your being a personality is created by thinking. That's how it gets created. If I ask you who you are, the only possible way you can answer me is to tell me what you think, isn't it? So that's obviously where who you are is being created in your thinking, right? Okay, so what if you move away from that thinking activity? Then what? Then it stops getting created. And so then the question becomes, okay, so if that stopped getting created, and now I move my attention over here to the awareness of the body breathing, that stops being created. Now who am I? Now who I am is very obvious. I don't even have to think about it. It's very obvious. Because the awareness has to be what I am, because without that, I'm not here. And that's not a thought either. That's not a belief. That's a direct experience. That's the awakening right there. That's the awakening. That's the first step, right? And you can't fool Mother Nature. You can't pretend you know that. You can't try and act like you know that because it'll make you look good, right? No, you either know it or you don't know it. And the only way you're going to know it is to pay attention sufficiently, to study the teachings sufficiently, so you recognize reality. So you recognize who you are. It's there all the time. Paul Hederman said something interesting about that law of attraction stuff. He said, look, how about if you started noticing how what you're thinking now is causing the shit you're putting up with? Why don't you look at it that way, right? If the law of attraction is true, it means the shit that you have in your life is being caused by the way you're thinking. So how about if you just withdraw from that activity and stop producing that stupid shit by the stupid thinking you're doing and get free from it and start getting related to reality the way it is? Maybe if you do that, this law of attraction thing will work naturally. You don't have to practice anything. Yeah, you stop using thinking as a way of existing. You stop using thinking as a way of existing so that the natural reality of who you are will naturally produce what your behavior causes to happen, naturally, coming from a quality place that's real, coming from unconditional love, coming from real power. Real power. What's real power? Real power means the ability to produce specific results that you intend. Isn't that power? Yeah. Well, your ability to do that is highly enhanced when you're free from the bullshit that goes on in your mind. That's why the people who are training the top players in the sports train them in meditation. Every team now is being trained in meditation now. Why? Because they don't want you to be thinking when you're in the game. They want you to be in the game and paying attention to the game and doing what you were trained to do. Not reacting, not thinking about it, just performing what you were trained to do. Simple as that. And when that's happening, you experience a very elated state. That's why professional sports players, or anybody that gets to that level of playing a game, experiences this experience of being really elated while you're doing it. It's an experience of elation while you're doing it, because you're free to be there, not thinking about what you're doing, but allowing what's happening to be seen clearly and respond to it. That's a very satisfying experience, isn't it?